started. Yep. So
Okay.
I think starting with the sort of revisioning and thinking of the timeline is a good idea, and maybe to sort of specify it a little bit. Can we reconstruct how many gigs of yours took place at Electronic Café International? What was the first one? What was the last one? What were the most memorable?
Yeah. Well, the first one, we did a piece called Proceed with Caution. And it was a solo for me. I don't even know if we have any photographs or video of that. And that was, when was that? That was probably maybe late 1989, like fall, winter, because we graduated Cal Arts May 1989.
Yeah.
And I didn't start working with Bela Lewitsky until January 1990. So it would have been somewhere either fall 89 or spring, summer 90. I don't recall. And then the next piece was Tactile Diaries. And that was, so I'm a little fuzzy on the timeline myself in terms of how Mark made contact with Kit and Sherry. How that went down, I can't remember. Just he came back to our apartment and was like, I found this really awesome place. We need to go make a work with them. They're doing really interesting things.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did. We just started making this piece called Tactile Diaries. And it was, I don't know if you have information about that piece, but it was between the Electronic Café in Santa Monica and the NYU television studios in New York. And there were 3 dancers in New York and a live audience in New York. And there were us in Santa Monica, and the cast for that piece was myself and my good friend Ilan Eglund. Her name is misspelled on your timeline. And then, yeah, I mean, that's a tiny thing, but kind of musical performers, the 3 I mentioned in that photograph, Wiley Evans, Tom Lopez, and Becky Allen. And then an actress called Shannon Kinney. And then 2 musicians whose names I won't remember. I have all this in a program in a box in my house in Portland, which is a big part of what I'm going to be doing over the winter break, is scanning all of this paper material for the archive. So I can get more information about it. I just don't have it off the top of my head right now. And then the 3 dancers in New York, I only remember 2. I don't remember who the 3rd person was. I think I didn't know her, but it was Robin Ziemer and Andrea. Was it Andrea? Oh gosh. I'm not remembering her last name. It's an M. Could have been Andrea Mills. Yeah. And then one other performer. And so we were really, it was the first time we were conceiving of a multi-site event, right? Where you've got live audiences in both spaces, and you need to consider what they're seeing independently and what they're seeing collectively. And a memorable part of that experience was the last solo in that piece, which is a solo for me wearing the MidiDancer outfit, right? Yeah. Mark worked with Kit to find a way to use the MidiDancer to trigger when the video phone would snap a photo, right? So there'd be certain positions I would take, and that would cause the camera to snap the photo, right? And my thinking around that, or Mark and I, our collective thinking around that, was we wanted to make a still image, almost stop motion animation solo that was unique to the audience in New York, because they're only going to see that. They're not going to see what I'm doing live, right?
Mm.
So that was our first dipping our toe into multi-site performance events, because Kit and Sherry were doing that. I don't recall if any of the performances that we did were technically part of CEAIT. I know we did like a kind of demonstration, a
Right.
lecture demonstration, which I have video of also. But so that Tactile Diaries was September 1990. And then there was a second piece called An Adjacent Disclosure in 1991, around the same time. I think it was fall 91. And that was a duet between myself and another dancer, Diane Vivona, who I met in the Lewitsky Dance Company. And she was performing in Highways, which was next door, with no audience, no live audience, just camera. And I was performing in the Electronic Café with a live audience and a camera. And the technology had improved in that year, so that Tactile Diaries used the handheld Sony video cameras that came out like a fax, those long pieces of image. And Adjacent Disclosure, now you could send live video between two sites. And they were using the PictureTel, I believe. I have some photos of this somewhere on my hard drive. So we were now compositing live video images, right? Mixing two live people in different spaces into one video image, right? And that was pretty interesting and exciting. And it was very collaborative with Kit, because he was part of the choreography with the camera, moving in and out and around, and really composing a third space, right?
Yeah.
This video space, yeah. And then after that, we did, I think it was, I don't know the sequence of this one. There was the Viacom MTV event.
Yes, that was something I was going to ask about, how the MTV collaboration came into being. You mentioned they just came, and but maybe you could provide other perspective.
I don't recall. I mean, CEAIT was happening at that time, so we had a lot of interaction with the Electronic Café. We were there a lot, just hanging out. A lot of time I was just hanging out. I actually was laughing on the phone with one of my best friends yesterday, reminding her of remember when we went to that CEAIT event and we drank too much wine? We were sitting in the parking lot and they kicked us out. You don't have to put that in your story, but it was a funny, we spent a lot of time hanging out there because it just had the right vibe, the right community of folks for us, right? So Viacom bought MTV and they had this big party at the Electronic Café. My memory is that Kit and Sherry were they had a little bit of a bad taste in their mouth, because they were such anti-capitalists, right? That they were sort of in this milieu all of a sudden of money and advertising, and it just felt a little incongruous. And I don't recall why or how they got that gig to happen at their space. No memory of that. But we did several things. I mean, my friend Jim Carney played. I think maybe Ravi Coltrane played. There was a bunch of jazz musicians that played, and it was a live event between LA and New York and possibly other spaces. I don't remember. But we just did, I did a composite duet with my friend Ilan Egland again, where I was wearing MidiDancer and controlling the sound in the room. And I was rehearsing, creating the piece and performing the piece in the Electronic Café, and Ilan was in a studio in New York City. So what was kind of extraordinary about that was we made the piece remotely. We were never in the same space when we made this piece. And that was pretty interesting, because we had So Kit set up like a little stage area, and there
Right.
were cameras, or there were monitors rather, on I think 3 sides. And then we had a a spike tape in the middle that was center. And Ilan had the same situation set up in New York, so that we could know, well, is that your right hand or your left hand? Oh, that's my right hand. Okay. Are you facing this front camera or the back camera? Which way? So we had to orient ourselves in our spaces. And then we could, they could mix us into a composite space. And so we choreographed very specifically for the composite. It was less important what was being seen of us individually and live in the space, and more important what the composite was. But it was interesting to see both. When you saw me alone and then you saw me with Ilan, you could make this connection. Yeah.
That's just amazing. And again, I'm sort of almost tired to repeat that Electronic Café, the things that they were doing was so much ahead of time, because only within the pandemic's context, people more, the wider audience explored the possibility of doing kind of performances and all kinds of things
Yes.
remotely, but it existed for quite a while, and only now it just kind of became more or less a common practice. So that's absolutely fascinating. And also,
yeah, we're talking 1992.
yes,
Yeah, a long time ago. Yeah.
finally awakening.
Yes,
Yes,
exactly.
and in the same context, that the scholar whose, I think, article I've shared, the scholar who wrote mostly about Electronic Café, Chris Paulsen, and she started her research when Sherry was still alive, and she just adding to this entire discussion, philosophy and phenomenology and so forth, she was making, I think her main argument was comparing the current practices to what was in the past, and the past seemingly is irrelevant if we consider this development of tech as a linear thing. And she sort of proposes to look back and to explore alternative and more meaningful ways to do that. So she's exactly discussing this space, composite space, what's in emerging in between, not here, not there, and the notion of telepresence, that it's not just about translating the images, that we can actually interact, and this interaction to create that kind of third space that is kind of in the time place domain, is somewhere just very different than what we experience.
Well, and also you can pass into and through each other's bodies.
Mm-hmm.
There's no skin, there's no edge to the body. So you can do kind of blended body images that are not possible in real space. And like, that's always been my interest, is like, why would I want to create my real reality and virtual reality when I could do a different reality that doesn't exist out here? Like, that's what I would do. Yeah. But yes, I found it very kind of humorous that in the pandemic, finally everyone embraced this possibility, where some of us had been living in this possibility for 20 years already, 25 years. So it was like, hey, welcome to the party, folks. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing part of it.
Oh, and actually there was one more piece. So we did Proceed with Caution, which had we didn't use the video phone. It was just a solo dance and music by Mark. And then we did Tactile Diaries, which did the MidiDancer and the video phone. Then we did Adjacent Disclosure, which used live video and picture tell. Then we did the Viacom MTV event, which took that same technology further. And then we did at the kitchen, we did, what was the Electronic Disturbance. Yeah. And that was a 3-site, and that was our piece. That was Troika Ranch, Mark and Dawn. But we got to perform at the kitchen because of Mort, because we were nobody. We were nobody. And Mort was doing, I guess it must have, I don't think it was Misfortune of the Immortals, but it must have been. I can't remember because there's some stories inside of that piece and what happened inside of the Misfortune of the Immortals. But in any case, I think it was spring '94, because we now lived in New York. We did, oh no, it was '96 maybe. Shoot, I'm not going to remember the year. Forgive me. I can look it up. But we did the Electronic Disturbance. And that was based on a book called The Electronic Disturbance by an arts organization called the Critical Art Ensemble. Yeah. And we met one of the writers of that book because he worked at the bookstore, the B. Dalton bookstore, right next to where Mort lived in New York City on 6th Avenue. And I don't know what that street was. And it was kind of crazy. He also was just a, working guy trying to make a living and be an artist. And we were really inspired by that book. And so we created this piece, and it had dancers in New York at the kitchen. It had Joan LaBarbera singing in Santa Fe. And it had our friend actor Ernie Lafke in LA as an actor. And we composited Joan and Ernie's faces together to make them into this kind of genderless, amorphous composite video entity. Yeah. So that was, I think, there were a lot of issues doing that performance that were challenging, partly because Kit was such an expert at doing this stuff already. And I think he wasn't respected in that way at the kitchen somehow. I don't remember, but there was a lot of tension and frustration. And I remember our show was supposed to start at 8 and it didn't start until 10 or something like that. There was just endless technology issues. This is 1996, I think. No, it might have been 4. It was really early, right? So of course there were problems. So that was the whole breadth of our collaborative relationship with Kit and Sherry. The last thing being what we did at the kitchen, the Electronic Disturbance. You know what? Let me look on my website for the date, because I'll probably have it there. I know we don't have any video of it up, working on it, but
I think there was something on Vimeo. I may just be blanking on specifics.
yeah, 1996 it was. We don't have, I do have video of the work, but it's just not on the website because I'm trying hard to get caught up with my own archive, my own history. Anyway, but that's pretty much it. And then I think we didn't collaborate certainly with Kit and Sherry ever again. We would visit them whenever we would come to LA. That was kind of the end of that. And then we didn't realize how angry Kit was with us. I think it was a period where the way we were describing the work on our website, he felt was inaccurate. And in retrospect and looking back at it, it was. We weren't giving him enough credit for the collaborative relationship that we had. And so, there were a lot of generational differences also between Mark and I, and then Kit and Sherry, and then Morton Joan, and then Woody and Stana. They're like every decade older than us. So that just was different. Sorry, my lighting is doing all kinds of fucked up things. Anyway.
Yeah, I think Kit softened with age. And it's interesting the perspective that you are providing, and actually that informal part, I think it's valuable. It's regarding the hanging out and so forth. That's all human, and just providing this kind of glossy picture, polished of Art+Tech innovations without describing what's been in between. That's kind of not quite true. Again, my perception, and I didn't hear like those stories from from anyone else. And maybe
Well,
generation, Morton probably didn't do that thing.
or he may have forgotten. I mean, more, the older you get and the more interactions you have with so many people about so many things, some things fall away, right?
Yeah.
So I don't even know how well I remember all of that. But one thing I do remember is it was not like shiny object at all. It was very gritty, down home. We're building this, soldering right now here, at the event, really pushing what was possible, and I always loved living on that edge of this hasn't happened before. Let's see what we can do with it, whatever it is. And I think that's why I've lost my interest actually in some of this technology space, because it just doesn't feel, it feels, I don't know. I haven't found my right foothold, I guess, in it, but I don't have the right collaborators or the right kind of attitude about it's too shiny, it's too available, it's too push and play. There's something about it that doesn't interest me anymore in the same way. And that's maybe fine, because maybe it's not my time. It's somebody else's time to do that. But I don't know.
Yeah. So you, am I correct that you left Los Angeles in sometime in 94?
Yeah.
Okay, so that was after Northridge earthquake, because one of my wonderings is how the earthquake impacted you, your thinking, your work. I mean, it's something that actually impacts thinking as a disruption. I think for faculty at CalArts specifically, Kid mentioned that for a year, CalArts hosted classes at Electronic Café International, and they were sort of performing the roles of instructors with Sherry.
I didn't know that.
Memories, yeah, that would be valuable to have.
Well, I mean, there's so many things in what you just said. It's funny because I don't sleep real well these days. And last night I kept thinking about the earthquake, like that, because it's not funny at all. It was horrifying. Mark and I had just been at the Atlantic Center for the Arts with Morton Joan and Woody and Stana, and we were working on The Misfortune of the Immortals. And I came home because Mark was staying another week to work with Joan. They were working, I think, on Jacob's Room. They were working with Herb Blau, who's a director. And Herb Blau came in, and that last week they spent working on something I wasn't part of. So I went home. And Mark and I are already a couple at this point. And then he came home the night the earthquake happened. So I would have been alone if he was still in Florida at the Atlantic Center. So I was very thankful. But like, he got home that night, and then we were awakened in the middle of the 5 o'clock in the morning. And it was so jarring to be woken up in the middle of the night with that event that it still affects me. It's still troubling that I am living in Los Angeles again by myself, thinking, oh God, when's the next one coming? Right. So there's that. That's a little personal side of things. And, they happen all the time. I mean, I feel them, little ones. So that was January 94. And I think the previous fall had gone, our friends, Jim Carney and Heidi Beyer got married. And Jim was a piano player at CalArts, and Heidi was in film and animation stuff, or not animation. Anyway, film school. They got married back east in New York, Schenectady, near Schenectady. And so Mark and I flew back east. We stayed with our friends, Michael Weiss and Margaret Hennessy, in their Brooklyn apartment. And while we were there, I remember saying, I think we should move to New York. I think because we had a lot of frustration about particularly the dance scene in Los Angeles. And just that Los Angeles was so spread out, right? That, you know, it was very rare if you lived in Santa Monica that you were going to go to Pasadena to see a show. It just wasn't going to happen. And I think we just felt like we needed a new environment and to kind of challenge ourselves in a new way. I had just done the paperwork to become a 501c3 not-for-profit organization for Troika Ranch. And we didn't get that approval until April 94. But in any case, it was the thought was in our heads that I think we're going to move to New York. And then the earthquake happened, and that was another motivator. Yeah, let's get the hell out of here. Right. I don't know how it affected the making of my work. I never thought of that actually until just now, if it did. But something that was going on at that time for us was the misfortune of the Immortals, right? Mort asked Mark and I to be part of that. And I think it was kind of because he needed Mark's help as a programmer for what he was doing. And it was kind of like Mark said, well, bring us along as artists and we'll do it, right? Or he'll do it. And so we went to the Yellow Springs Institute in Pennsylvania, and then we went to the Atlantic Center of the Arts, and then we were going to premiere it at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, which happened, but it happened in kind of a weird way. The piece never really came together as a fully produced event. It was 3 separate ideas that kind of happened. But out of that came the development of our piece called In Plane. That piece was a direct outgrowth from working on the misfortune of the Immortals. And then that piece is what kind of put us on the map, me and Mark, because we started showing it all over the place. We reworked it and it became the piece. You know, we went to a lot of music conferences, ICMC, and I don't even remember. I don't know if we ever did a SIGGRAPH, but what was the other one? I forget. But there were a lot of visual art and music conferences because dance and theater were way behind in terms of the technological revolution that was going on in the 90s. And so we spent a lot of time in electronic music circles or visual art circles because they were using computers in their making of their work. And dancers and theater makers were not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah, I actually, in regard to LA, and because with CEAIT, why it's so special, the intention was to spread beyond the School of Music where it was based.
Yes.
And animation specifically because of the son of Morton. It didn't happen, but I sort of briefly had a chance to ask the artists back then at California Institute of the Arts, and it looks like from David I've heard that there was certain resistance and so forth, and I've just again it was explained or excused as a generational thing, but I basically heard that the sort of this fake opposition between art and technology, that they sort of incompatible. Louis Mumford wrote and published his book like 100 years ago, and
I don't know his book. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I will share it anyway. So it's just kind of the fact that this narrative has been repeating on. It's confusing.
Well, there was just the trajectory then. So Mark and I made this piece called In Plane, which came out of the the Immortals.
Mm-hmm.
Why that piece fell apart, I don't remember. I don't remember if it didn't get the next level of funding, because we did a presentation at the Walker Art Center, and it was Mort and the piece he made for Wenton, for Yeoman Wenton,
mm-hmm.
a Balinese dancer, and Joan performed in a wheelchair with all these because she was doing something about Nikola Tesla, I think,
Mhm.
or maybe Stephen Hawking. It was probably Stephen Hawking. And then Mark and I did this in plain piece with Power Booth, who was a visual artist in New York. He dropped out of the program at some point and was no longer part of it. Anyway, so for whatever reason, that piece didn't go forward in terms of its funding and it was never fully produced, right? So, and I had quit my job with the Bela Lewitsky Dance Company so that I could do this project. So Mark and I at that point were basically like, okay, here we go. We're launching Troika Ranch. We're going to do our own thing. This is what we're going to do now. And we had this one piece in plain as our kind of calling card. And Mark had developed MidiDancer and Interactor, which is the software that precedes Isadora.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did a lot of lecture demonstrations all over the place. And we didn't really start teaching. It was in 1999 in New York that we decided to teach a workshop specifically for dancers and choreographers, because they were missing out on this whole wave of information about technology and the use of the computer and video that we thought was really exciting. And they didn't have any access to it. They had no way to get to it because dance schools at that time were so, I mean, this is the instrument, right, of the dancer, this physical corporeal thing, and the actor, right? And so they just didn't have any way in. So we started teaching a workshop at Context Studios on Avenue A in New York. It's since gone, but in 99, and we taught it every summer until 2016. And we taught versions of it at universities and art institutions all over the place. And it was called the Live Eye Workshop for live interaction. And that came because of what we were doing, what Mark was doing already, you know, writing code, what Mort was doing, what we saw at the Electronic Café, what we learned at the Studio for Electro-Instrumental Music in Amsterdam under Stena, what Woody and Stena were doing. It was like, why are there no dancers in this world? Why are there no choreographers in this world? Because they don't know about it. So that's what we did. And that workshop, yeah, that was it was the right time, and it was a big part of how we survived financially, because people would come from all over the world. I mean, like early on, we had people coming from New Zealand and Japan to New York to study with us. And it was like, wow. And this is early internet days. This is how people knew about us, because of the internet.
Yeah. What you've mentioned about funding, that was John, she didn't share that part about Stephen Hawking, but I've uploaded this review of Kyle Gann from 97, and the interesting thing that popped up out of our conversation with John, so in terms of funding and how it impacts the arts, or what actually becomes an ultimate product, because those are stakeholders, and they should have their own interests. So I was wondering in context of CEAIT, like how AT&T, whether there was any impact in context with ECI, what was the interest of MTV of funding that? And here, John just brought in the whole another dimension with funding from like producers of alcoholic drinks or cigarettes, Philip Morris, that funded performance. Were there any kind of I don't know, this unusual or just interesting encounters, collaborations in terms of kind of funding support of the performance on your memory?
Well, what I said earlier about Kit and Sherry's kind of soul being very anti-capitalist, very free society, you know, information highway where everything is available to everyone, that did not jive well with AT&T and Philip Morris and all those mega funders. And, this is also the time of Jesse Helms and the NEA collapse and
Yes.
all of that dynamic going on about arts funding and freedom of speech. And I also think, and this is just me and my perspective of, I think this is what I remember though, is that there was a lot of excitement around what Kit and Sherry were doing, that people thought, oh, we're going to monetize this, right? We're going to jump in here and get some bucks out of this because this is exciting. And I think their whole perspective was like, no, it's not about that. That's not what we're about. And this is not new in the relationship between experimental art producers, makers, and funding bodies, or people who want to exploit the ideas for money when the artists working in there are not even thinking about that. I mean, yeah, we want to pay our rent, but we want to make our point. That's what's most important about what we're doing, is the experience and the exchange and maybe the statements if there are some. But so we left New York, left LA, right? We went to New York and then had to face our own reality about how are we going to get money to do our work. And why the bringing up of the Live Eye workshop is an important distinction for us, because we were never that popular of an arts organization to get funding from all the big bodies. We didn't. We funded our own work through teaching a lot of the time. So when I look at Troika Ranch's budgets, my memory is that about 80% of our budget was earned income. We worked for it. We taught, we created work on students, we performed in, festivals or whatever. But we didn't get any major funding until the year, like right before we divorced and split up. I mean, because it's not like we weren't trying, but we also were more focused on what we were making than how to get money for it. I mean, Mark was programming for Mort, making music, right?
Yeah.
We both worked at Voyager. I was the producer. I was the assistant to the executive producer, Jane Wheeler, who's another name that may or may not have come up in your world, because she produced Making Music. Wait a minute, I just want to make sure I downloaded this thing because
I can share more. I just didn't want to overwhelm.
That's okay. So we're both working at Voyager in the early 90s. I'm also then I quit Voyager and I start doing personal training and teaching Pilates and kind of what traditional dancers do. And Mark starts to work for Kevin Cunningham and Three-Legged Dog, 3LD Art and Technology, writing a piece of software. I think it was called Production Designer, if I'm not mistaken, which never really goes anywhere, but he was making really good money. So I quit my little piddly day jobs running around all over the city, making a little bit of money here and there, and focused solely on trying to raise money for Troika Ranch. That's when I really put together our board of directors. I tried to write more grants, but we got rejected a lot because no one could figure out what in the hell we were doing, right? We're doing something that no one's heard of MIDI, not in those worlds. Right? The dance and theater world is not the electronic music world, right? The electronic music world knows what Max is. They know what MIDI is. They understand these ideas, but you step over into dance and theater and live performance, very few people. There's Laurie Anderson, right? She's huge, but she's still a musician, right? There's just not a lot going on. And the people that were doing stuff were in Japan, like Dumb Type. They were really innovative, but they weren't in New York City. So it was us trying to make inroads into places. We were presented by John King at the Kitchen, who was the music curator, not in their downstairs main stage, but upstairs in their smaller theater. That was, I don't even know, 97, maybe something like that. We were never embraced. And when we got involved with Here Art Center. I don't know if you're familiar with Here Art Center.
Yes, I think I've heard about it. Yeah.
Yeah, Kristen Marting. We were invited to be part of the very first HARP residency, HARP, HARP, Here Artist Residency Program. So we were in that, the very inaugural year of that thing. And that started a long relationship with Kristen, who championed what we were doing and helped us be seen by the Jerome Foundation. And the Jerome Foundation funded us for 5 years to the tune of about maybe $8,000 to $10,000 a year. So it's not huge money, but it's enough for us. We're happy, you know, and we get little things here and there, but we're teaching now. We have this thing that we can offer that's unique and special and desired. And Isadora is not born yet. It's still Interactor until actually it's the year 2000, Mark makes Isadora. Because we were starting to teach and it was hard using using Interactor and Imagine and trying to put them together. It crashed a lot. It was a really high learning curve. So Mark was like, I'm going to write something that allows dancers and theater, movement artists to understand this world a little better. So that's when he started with Isadora. I feel like there was something else you asked me and I forgot what it was now.
No, I mean, we will probably get back to it. Yeah, I've just on my mind, as you, so if considering this early trio of CEAIT, David, Morton, and Mark, so Mark and Morton, they did a lot of kind of software and so forth stuff together, and which is in the same domain as what David was doing with HMSL, harmonic. Anyway, I will recall the abbreviation, compositional language anyway, software, and harmonic tone harmonic form generator, HFG. I'm just confusing it with the one that was an inspiration for it and all these abbreviations. Anyway, so I've been just catching myself and thinking, so he was doing his own thing, Mark and Morton, they were doing their own thing as well, and I don't quite see how the two impacted each other, one another, and overlapped. And I think on the conference in '92, they presented the report on CEAIT activities, and I think that's the most important document actually about CEAIT. And David presented separately about his harmonic form generator. Yet, as I was watching the Open School video the other day with when David, Mark, and Morton were going to the schools and teaching, and it was part of actually testing the viability of their software as well, teaching kids composition with using computers, MIDI, and so forth. And that should be in '92 or '93. And I've noticed Mark from time to time popped up and asked like the questions about the perception and sort of in this psychoacoustics domain and cognition and so forth. And that was the thing for David. And it just struck me right now. What's the connection here between the innovation of David and what Mark and Morton were doing together? Why they didn't end up sort of creating sort of convergent kind of product for what David was up to and what Mark and Morton. So anyway.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I'm thinking about that time period in general. And there was a lot of people just writing their own stuff, making their own systems. That was part of it. Everyone we knew was creating a software or a hardware that did something, right? Using MIDI or using brainwaves or using body motion, or it was in the air. That's what everyone was doing. Like seeking, we were all seeking something, some alternative way of playing music, interacting with visuals, which came later. That was like, I mean, Mark and I, in all of our lectures, and he really initiated this, we were building instruments. They just weren't played like a piano or a drum. They were played with a whole body moving through space, but it's still an instrument. And it has its limitations, and it has its, as I started talking about, imposed choreography. So why the three of them never created something together, I couldn't tell you. Maybe it was three different egos who had their own vision and could never, I don't know. I mean, Mark was a sort of linchpin, maybe. He did things maybe for David, he did things for Mort, he did things for us, but he was his own entity, right?
Yeah.
He was a skilled programmer, and everybody needed that. They needed a brain like Mark's that could write the code, right? And we got interested in different things, I guess. I mean, Mort really made operas. You know, David was making, I guess, and I don't really know that much about what David was doing. My interactions with David were very slight. He was the dean of the music school, and I knew him through CEAIT, but we weren't, you know, I mean, if I saw him today, I could say hello, but it's not, we never collaborated or anything like that. So, and for whatever reason, yeah, I think Mark maybe just wanted to have his own agency. You know, I want to do my thing that I want to do for my artwork. And that's why Troika Ranch took him. You know, we went to New York and did our own thing. I don't know why they didn't ever make a piece of software together. You could ask him.
Sure. And I don't remember, Richard Lovenberg shared with me a couple of photos with some, I guess, Japanese dancer with body sensors. He didn't provide much of information. I don't know if by chance you witnessed it.
I'm sure I was. Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean. Everybody was doing this. See it? Everybody, every show, somebody came in with some new kind of controller. That's what it was. That's what it was about. New body controllers to produce and manipulate digital music or electronic music, let's say. So yeah, I probably saw this event, and that looks like maybe it was about tension, the tension of the muscle. Yeah, but there were a million of them. I mean, so many of us were doing this. And you said something a minute back about perception, and that, I don't know exactly what you were talking about, but what it triggered me to think was a part of the conversation I was having with myself and with Mark and with our audience was, what do you think is going on here? Because we're making these instruments that they don't know how they work. They've never seen them before, right? So the pieces get very descriptive, like ging gong, ging gong, right? They're not art yet. They're still in a mode of explaining to the audience how this thing works, right? And so we went on trajectories around that for years. I mean, after we made In Plane in 1994, we presented it by itself, because after, that's what it was. Richard Lovelace, have you heard of? He's at the Center for Experiments in Art and Technology at Arizona State University. It's not it's not the name of it, because that's this name. It's a different kind of institute. Richard Lovelace. Shoot, I can't remember. but he had a space at Arizona State. They had what was called the Intelligent Stage. They still have it, still there. John Mitchell is there at Arizona State. So the next residency after the Atlantic Center for the Arts and the Walker Art Center, we went to Arizona State. Maybe and that's where we finished making In Plane separately on our own. Like not as part of the Misfortune of the Immortals, but just as its own little thing. Woody and Stana were there, Mort was there. Yeah, anyway. But right after In Plane was born, I started asking myself, could we make a piece that uses complex, sophisticated computer technology where the piece is not about the use of complex, sophisticated computer technology? Can we use this instrument to make human stories?
Mm-hmm.
And that was the next 10 years of my life, was exploring that question, because I felt, so also there's Todd Mackover at this time, right, at MIT Media Lab, right? He's, you know, a rising star in the electronic music world of interactive controllers. And I remember going to see a piece and the spotlight was like on the mixing console, watching the sliders go up and down, or watching the MIDI keyboard piano keys get pressed with nobody touching them. And these are, you know, I was like, what's happening here? You know, I mean, and then so Mark and I started doing a lot of our lectures about how you play a violin or how you play a piano. You're not necessarily watching the finger relationship on the piano to give you insight about the emotionality of the music. You're listening to the music, that's where the meaning comes from. Because with MidiDancer, I'm making choreography with my body that has to be read in a certain way. And through that choreography, I'm making music that has to be read in a certain way. How do you link those things? How do you make them both part of that same meaning? And so anyway, it was a 10-year, more than that, because we also committed to working with the MidiDancer for 10 years. Because our thought was, how long does it take to play the piano? Easy 10 years, right? How long does it take to be a dancer? Easy 10 years to get even a little bit good at it, right? So we committed to staying with the MidiDancer for 10 years. And part of that was because of these images that you just showed me. People were coming in, look at my new system. And then it was gone, poof, like on to the next new thing. And that was problematic, I thought.
Yeah, so if thinking back to, I mean, that's pretty important in terms of what ultimately will be included in the text and what's not, what the question, what pieces I can more or less legitimately, what pieces of yours and Mark I can more or less legitimately associate with CEAIT. It's tricky, and it's tricky with Morton. And as I talk to different people about the projects that were associated, about the projects of their colleagues, they give different answers. So I don't know, for example, for Morton, the misfortune of Immortals may be kind of closely associated with CEAIT and shall be considered within it. And for someone else that's not related at all. And for example, I've also asked Morton. There was an exhibition of Cage. You should be witnessing it. He was in LA. That started just before the work on it started just before his death. Really fall over.
Yes, I have a story about that, actually.
Yeah, I will get to it. So David got involved in that, and he actually, again, a little secret, he keeps, I think, the largest collection of documentation for that thing, because I've got nuts at some point, because there were so many piles of documents. But that's my concern with the archive and its use. So he was working on this installation, and it's about to sound, And when he represents his work, he associates that not just his individual involvement, which was exactly, he was just the one contributing from the CEAIT, but he presented it as in the documents as well as the CEAIT affiliated project, his work on the sound installation for the exhibit. And when I talked to Morton, he could barely remember anything like that. So here we go back again, and maybe before I will continue with this question, you could tell the story related to exhibit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, first of all, going back to your original point about what works were really part of CEAIT, I feel like the early days of Troika Ranch were inspired, and maybe we were given a platform because of Mark's relationship with that entity.
Mm-hmm.
But that stopped in 1994 when we left, right? Like that was it. So In Plane came after.
Mm-hmm.
So I would not associate In Plane as being part of CEAIT, but it came out of the Misfortune of the Immortals, which was. So that's the like marker, just to be clear. So all the stuff I'm talking to you about my own career later,
Yes,
that was a fertile ground of learning and seeing and experiencing for me as a young artist. But I didn't make work until, that really utilized everything I learned until later, right? So it's the pieces I told you, the Proceed with Caution, Tactile Diaries, Adjacent Disclosure, the MTV Viacom, and the kitchen performance, I guess, with the Electronic Disturbance could be part of that.
mm-hmm.
Right. So, but nothing else. Everything else is post. So the Roly Holy Over a Circus, Mark programmed that for David. He organized all the DAT tapes of all the different sound files. Mark worked on that with David, for sure. Because I know this, because we were there at the grand opening event. And Merce Cunningham, John Cage's life partner and collaborative partner, was coming. And Mark and I were by the little installation, which was just headphones that you put on.
Yeah.
And it sort of randomly, I think, chose different snippets of sound. I don't remember all the details of not only John Cage, but I think of his colleagues as well. Lots of different sound.
Yeah, I'm okay. Should this kind of metallic book, I can give a link with a bunch of stuff. Kind of.
I have one. It's the program for the show.
Yeah.
And the story is that's why it was so extraordinary for me, was that I could see Merce Cunningham just came into the building because there was a whole big bubble of activity over there, right? And Mark is at the computer and I'm like, oh no, I have to pee. Crap, I'm gonna run and go pee and I'll get back before he gets here. So I run to the bathroom, I go pee, I come out of the bathroom door, and standing right in front of me is Merce Cunningham and his entourage. And I'm like, well, I have to take this opportunity. So I go up to him and I say, Mr. Cunningham, I'm such a fan. I'm a dancer choreographer here in LA. I'm just such a fan. I'm so glad you're here. I'm sorry for your lot, blah, blah. And the guy standing with him is the director of the museum. And he says, oh, you're a dancer choreographer. Walk with us. I'm like, okay. Now I'm walking with the Merce Cunningham entourage. We walk by the gift shop. He grabs me one of those programs and says, here, you should have this, and just gave it to me. So I have one of those if you need to photograph it at home in Portland, of course. So that's the first part of the story. So now I'm walking with the Merce Cunningham entourage towards Mark. I'm like waving. He's like, what? What's happening? At the same moment, and I don't know if you talked to David about this at all, a patron, because this was a VIP only event. This was the opening event for funder, people who gave money to the museum and stuff. A VIP guest saw that the plug in the wall was a little bit out, and so they unplugged it and plugged it back in, and it wiped the installation out of the park. So Mark is like, all of a sudden, what's going on? What's going on? Merce is right here, coming to sit down to experience the installation, and it's can't work because this is 1990, whatever it was, and shit didn't work so well back then. So Merce sits down next to Mark, and Mark's like trying really hard to like get it to come back to life and all this. And finally Merce stops him and says, why don't you just tell me about it? Because Mark's like, Merce, I'm so sorry. I can't get it to work. And so Mark just explained it to Merce, who closed his eyes and just listened. It's like, wow, that sounds really wonderful. John would have loved that. And then went on his way. And it was an extraordinary night, both for me and for Mark, because the whole thing he had worked so hard on didn't work for Merce Cunningham. You can ask David about that story. I don't know if he remembers, but Mark surely does. He'll tell you.
Oh, I mean, I just remember that's again the thing, as you say, in relation to sort of recognizing Ken and Sherry. I think for the double check, I mean, most it's another kind of story that is poorly documented, poorly pulled over, because it was a 3 years thing that toured even into Europe. And there's just one article I think written about it, and written without awareness that most of the documentation is in the archive of David Rosenboom. So there's no kind of good narrative about what it was, nothing comprehensive really. And based on the scarcity of documents in that article that I was reading, that gets deeper in particular moments, but David there is just mentioned almost occasionally. And of course there's no like CEAIT mark or whatever. And the other day, and that's a scholarly article, and the other day I've Googled just for precision the information about Holy Over, and in the press release, I think of Guggenheim or something, there is just one paragraph, the installation, and only David mentioned, which sounds a bit tricky given the contribution of Mark. And again, I can, without witnessing it, just putting together the archive and seeing how this huge stacks and associated with Mark's work, it's, I don't know, it's kind of,
well, I mean, Mark had nothing to do with the artistic
yes,
design of that piece. He just did the underneath to make it work, to program whatever it, I don't even know what they used. I just remember him having to go through lots of DAT tapes, little tiny DAT tapes. Getting the samples and getting them to figure out a way for them to randomly play back. But he was not a part of the artistic vision at all. So
I think David still has the entire collection of those tapes.
I'm just looking at the clock and I realize I have another meeting at 1.
Sure.
This is, but I'm very interested in this, and we should have another conversation. But I just wanted to, just to correct my friend Ilan's last name. Where was that?
Yeah, I think I've grabbed it from the website of ECI, and there was just name, and then I was struggling to find the last name, and I finally saw it somewhere, but I think
here it is. Yeah, Composite Image Space MIDI-Dance Performance at ECI. That is the Viacom MTV event. And that her last name is Egland. It's just changed the O to a G. Egland. Egland.
Okay.
But I could, and this 3 cities multi. Yeah, Leo Smith, right. Oh, my name has 2 P's. I've just noticed. Stoppiello has 2 P's. That's little. And I think that might be me in that photograph standing on top of a table.
Yeah.
Or I can't tell.
Well, I'm pretty sure. Yes.
That's a MidiDancer thing.
Yeah, and yeah, and I was in this thread regarding associating the works. so with David, as I've included in the timeline, the 2 videos that are in public access, and one of them is for the brainwave. For the brainwave piece that he was working on with Kent Cleland and was using his software for. So again, the way he presented it was that it sort of came out of the work of CEAIT, but technically neither Mark nor Morton, as far as I'm aware, participated in the development of that piece. So yeah, it's just in regard to my struggle, which artistic works I should be associating with and consider as the output of CEAIT and which not. And without piece, it also kind of it's related to the I didn't have a chance to clarify like what the earthquake meant to David, but within the institutional context and within the context of CEAIT, that's an important disruption. And they had to, again, with CalArts, it was really something unique because they had to travel to other places to teach their classes, like synagogues and so forth. Yeah. But in relation to his brainwave piece, in addition to that kind of event, the collapse and so forth, I was wondering, because he doesn't have that many political pieces at all, and it's not his thing. And here he took as a basis, as narrative for his brainwave piece, Jefferson, Hypatia, and the political kind of subjects. And I was asking him once or maybe a couple of times, why this turn, why at that time, and that's the explanation, that the very kind of I don't know, not particularly comprehensive, that I've received from him is that there was this National Endowment for Arts thing, and that this piece to a certain degree was sort of a response to what's been going on in the art world, and how certain I don't know how that cutting impacted artists and art schools and so forth.
Yeah, that the piece that I told you about, Proceed with Caution, was also in response to what was going on. That was our piece, you know, it was just a little, I was all wrapped up in belts, you know, like, so yeah, there was a lot of that in the air. Because we also weren't doing super political pieces. We were really, I think all of us were really investigating, what is this intersection between humans and machines? Like, what is this relationship going to be like, you know, on some level? But I would love to speak some more with you, because obviously this is all gets me very riled up and excited, because it was a pretty interesting time. And if I can help you, I don't know, maybe I can't help, maybe I've done it, maybe I've given you all I can give you. I don't know.
Yeah, sure. So
Yeah.
for now.